Wouldn't it be nice to have several thought leaders in your industry know and love your brand? Start a podcast. Invite your industry's thought leaders to be guests on your show and start reaping the benefits of having a network full of industry influencers. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles, Director of Partnerships here at Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Matt Gingerich. He is the VP of Sales and Success at Bombora. Matt, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing great, Logan. Good morning.
Good morning on a cold, snowy day that we're both experiencing in different parts of the country today. Really excited to have you on the show, man. You and I were talking the other day about a change that you guys made to your sales process that I think just makes a whole ton of sense. And you guys have seen some good results with it in just experimenting with this new process over a couple of months. Before we break that down for listeners, I would love for you to share a little bit about your background and what you and the team at Bombora are up to these days.
Yeah, happy to. So I come from the B2B space almost exclusively. Spent just about a decade at a company called Serious Decisions on the advisory side for B2B sales and marketing leaders, and find myself today heading up sales for Bombora, the industry's largest B2B intent data aggregator. So from Bombora perspective, we let our clients know which companies are interested in what they sell right now based on their online research around their products and services. Ultimately, a B2B data standard that sales and marketing can use to really drive aligned and full funnel orchestration of their programs.
Yeah, you hit on a good point. I think a lot of folks are talking about orchestration these days. Scott Vaughn just had a LinkedIn article he published this morning talking about the move from automation to orchestration, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and part of that, the body of that article is really the suggestion that in 2019, marketing and sales, and especially in the B2B world, are going to be focused more on the orchestration component. With a bit of belief that we've been a bit overserved, if you will, from a data and technology perspective. That orchestration idea and concept is one that's actually helped drive some of the change in our process that you and I discussed.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to segue into today's conversation. So we're going to be talking about the sales process change that you guys made and where other B2B companies can emulate this. And really the effect has been, quicker wins, fewer stalled deals, less time spent in negotiation, more leverage at those points. So let's kick it off with, what was your process before and what really drove you guys to make a change? It kind of all centered around moving away from kind of your standard POC or your proof of concept approach before, right, Matt?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We had the belief and still do believe this, that when our prospects and customers get their hands on our data, if we begin to allow the use of that data, ultimately they're not going to want to turn off the data. So with that belief, for the better part of a year, we had been essentially kicking off pretty early in the sales cycle, delivering some data historical analysis around their buyers' journeys, starting to let the data flow through some of their existing programs and processes, and even some of the technology providers and platforms that they work with. And that was working to an extent. But what we realized is we hadn't put enough rigor or guidelines in place to really build toward a business case, to develop the right success metrics, to support that business case, and ultimately to drive a really tight and fairly quick sales cycle. It turned into one of these, yeah, we love your data and we'd love to continue to test it. We need another month, we need another quarter, whatever the case may be. So that's really what forced us to take a look in the mirror, focus internally, and really look at the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you went from kind of this, do we do a proof of concept? Do we not? And went to a more specifically defined 90-day action plan approach to putting your customers and your team on the same page of actually starting to implement more. So not just giving them the data, but almost taking them through a pre-onboarding before they'd sign the deal, right?
That's right. Yeah, we have essentially 3 core stages now, and my team's specifically responsible for selling subscription licenses to enterprise customers, to brands directly. Okay. And we have a stage of engaged where we've had a conversation. We know that there are next steps and an interest in continuing to pursue or evaluate how our data may help drive impact for their programs. And in that stage, and this is oftentimes even the very first conversation, our sales team is doing research ahead of time to understand what they believe this client would look like. You are a $100,000 client, you're a $500,000 client, somewhere in between, based on some early research they're doing from their website, the products they sell, the industries they're in, et cetera. And they come to that first conversation with a notion of approximately what investment would be required to be an enterprise customer with us. And as they go through the discovery process, not unlike many other sales teams and their discovery processes, trying to identify what programs are they running today, what are their goals, what's the company's vision, who are the stakeholders across the different sales and marketing functions, what does their tech stack look like today, et cetera, et cetera. They're also setting the expectation up front really explicitly. And that expectation is that if you're interested in continuing to explore, we're not asking you for that 100K or 250 or 500K investment today. What we are asking you for is your commitment to partner with us in building the business case for a funding event for that investment within the next 90 days. And with that commitment, we are able to turn on a whole bunch of resources to help build that business case and those data points and success metrics to support it.
So a couple of things I noticed you said there, Matt. One, you're giving them a budget number earlier in the sales process. Obviously it's not a full-blown proposal and scope of work in that first conversation, but you're allowing your salespeople to give the prospect an idea of budget as opposed to hanging on to that and trying to, build value, and then release pricing a little bit later, but almost bring that up front. Is the thought there to disqualify bad deals early, to get some buy-in and make sure that you're on the same page, that as you build the value case, they have an idea of what number they're kind of building toward?
Yeah, all of the above. And it gives us a really good opportunity. One, some of the things that we've heard as a result of this really explicit conversation are things like, yes, we want to explore, but to be fair, we don't tell anybody we're actually looking for a new CEO right now. Or there's budget scrutiny that wasn't there 6 months ago, or we may not get our budgets until Q2. And it gives us the ability, or for even more specifically, I'm not the decision maker. Yes, it's my budget, but ultimately I have to have buy-in from, these other 1, 2, 3 stakeholders. And we get a ton of information that we wouldn't otherwise get about their process, their timing, their budget cycles, et cetera. And even in cases where it may not align directly to our 90-day plan, it gives us the ability to make the decision, do we go ahead and begin applying our resources to help build those data points for when they are ready? Or do we simply say, hey, we have a mutual interest here. We really look forward to picking this back up, in 6 months when you've indicated you'd be more ready.
Yeah. So kind of pause and restart as opposed to dragging out the sales cycle over, 6 to 8 months. That makes a ton of sense. So the other thing, in addition to having that frank budget conversation earlier, which is fascinating how much more intel you're gathering out of the account by having that conversation earlier. The other thing that you guys are doing is not just kind of, oh, here's access to the product, here's access to the data. You're actually going through a somewhat pre-onboarding process and involving your customer success team before they're actually a customer. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like, Matt, and some of the benefits that you've seen there?
Certainly, and I think this is huge. We, as many probably do, have bought into this notion that customer success begins long before a deal actually gets signed, right? It's more than just the post-sale environment. And with the commitment from our prospect to that 90-day action plan, we begin to essentially onboard that prospect as if they're a customer. So customer success gets involved. We apply a number of different resources from our end, both data and human capital, to begin doing analysis around which topics the company should be monitoring. We begin building an account plan complete with the different programs and campaigns that they're running today, different activation points for the data across media, advertising, marketing, sales prioritization, account intelligence, things of that nature, and begin to actually map out by program what provider or platform is this prospect using to support that program. How can our data be an influencer, a signal, a prioritization engine for that particular workflow, and give explicit guidance to the prospect or customer as to what our responsibility for delivering data would be, what the partner's responsibility for helping activate that data be, and even what the customer should expect in terms of resources required to make this workflow operate more effectively. And so by the time we've actually gotten to signing a deal, we've already got the data in workflow. We've already got an account plan built. The customer operations and customer success teams have helped them understand exactly which topics they should be using in which workflows. We've delivered an analysis of what their buyer's journey looks like, which can be hugely valuable for marketers, especially to understand how do our buyers actually go about researching our offerings and capabilities in the market.
It's story time, and this growth story is about search engine marketing. Okay, so the story revolves around eSub, a project management SaaS company specifically for subcontractors. Even though eSub had incredible customer retention, they struggled with growth. Being a niche service, they discovered that there was little demand expressed for their solutions within search engines. To take on this challenge, eSub hired Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. After refining targeting, pre-qualifying clicks with an ad copy, and developing custom landing pages, Directive was able to increase eSub's marketing qualified leads by 71%, while decreasing their cost per lead by 65%. I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
So what I see is by implementing this 90-day action plan with a commitment, albeit a softer commitment than signing on the dotted line, but an initial upfront commitment before they're a client, you get customer success involved earlier. You avoid that point of sales to brand new, account management and customer success handoff after the deal, which can be one of the biggest points of buyer's remorse and where customers can feel kind of lost if that handoff isn't going really, really well. You kind of avoid that chasm because you've already started the handoff much sooner. You've handed off the baton way earlier on the track than typically is the case. What are some of the ways that you guys have avoided overextending those resources? Because now you've got people on your customer success team involved in a deal that technically isn't signed and committed yet. What have you guys found there, Matt?
Yeah, it really comes down to gaining that commitment early and building out a really prescriptive plan of action, what we're going to be responsible for, what the customer or prospect is going to be responsible for, those timelines associated with those stages and steps, and then just managing it really actively. The AE or the account manager at that point is really essentially project managing what you could still call a POC in a sense, but they're constantly coming back to, here's the agreement that we've put in place, here's what we've delivered, here are our expectations or your sort of action items from the customer perspective. And that just keeps us all on the same page. And we've had times already where customers will come back and say, we were ready to rock with this. You're right, we committed. We've just had, a change in leadership, or we've had a change in our priorities or our budgeting. And they're much more forthcoming with that information, right? They truly are a partner. It's much more collaborative conversation, much less of a, quote unquote sales discussion, and much more of an activation discussion.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So tell us a little bit about some of the specific benefits that you guys have seen. I know, as we mentioned at the top of the interview, Matt, it's not been a long time that you guys have moved to this model, but tell us a little bit about what you guys have seen over the last couple of months in deal acceleration, as well as, I think, on the negotiating point. You alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I know as we were chatting offline, I think both of those points are worth speaking to, some of the benefits that you guys have uncovered in taking this model of a more systematic action plan than kind of a loose POC or pilot program.
Yeah, so we, you're absolutely right. We actually ran a 3-month sprint, OKR sprint, opportunity or objectives and key results, specifically around this new model to kind of test how effective it would be or ineffective it would be. And what we saw during that 90-day sprint, we closed about a dozen new enterprise deals, at least half of which originated during the sprint. That is, we're in that engaged stage and went through this full 90-day action plan that we've just talked about, which is really encouraging for us. During that same time, we generated $3 million of net new, what we call high bar pipeline. And high bar pipeline is, we've begun that onboarding process. We've done the testing and validation. We've built the account plan, and we're now in a 30-day window where sales is actively managing the procurement, or the funding event for signing the deal. So this is highly vetted, highly qualified, very late stage pipeline. So that was a big win for us. $3 million in 3 months of very late stage, highly vetted pipe is a real win. The other thing that's been really interesting is the procurement side itself, right? So where we would see oftentimes, I'm sure this isn't too dissimilar from others, multiple rounds of negotiation, even after the economic buyer has agreed to terms and timing and investment. They tend to, especially in some of these large enterprise companies, right? They parachute in the procurement folks. It's not a value proposition conversation. And we've had a few really interesting cases where the procurement person has said, well, this is the all the budget we have, and it's less than what the buyer had agreed to. Or, we need a testing period. We have to have a trial, either paid or unpaid. The funding's not going to be in place until February, things of that nature, right? Very typical sort of out of the book procurement tactics. We need a discount. And instead of us having to kind of play that game, we're able to come back and say, over the course of the last 3 months, here are the things we've delivered, many of them already valuable to your team. With those deliverables, here are the data points that we've been able to derive about impact, lift in terms of your programs, acceleration for your own sales cycles, et cetera, et cetera. And for those reasons, the economic buyer, and oftentimes by name, has agreed to these following terms. We've already been through the negotiation. And it sets them a little bit back on their heels in some cases, right? Which if you dealt with the procurement negotiations for as long as some of us has, it's a really interesting dynamic change. And it puts us really in a place of power and partnership, because now we've spent not only our time, but their economic buyer's time building all of these cases and building the workflows. And it's now a question of, we are hoping that this is going to be a procurement conversation where you partner with us to make sure that your economic buyer gets what they need in the time frame that they need it, versus you are going to, negotiate some sort of a steep discount or more favorable terms and things of that nature. So that piece of it for me personally has actually been really fun.
Right, man, that's a completely different conversation, right? Like, this is the action plan. This is where we're moving towards with the economic buyers, or the buyer committee that you've been working with up to that point, and helping and framing it to procurement that, this is where we need to go to finish out this plan that we've already been active on, as opposed to going to procurement and saying, okay, we have buy-in here, we'd like to start implementation, and you're hoping and looking for that signature, that purchase order, that okay to start implementation. It flips the conversation and the position of power in that conversation. A great book I read recently by Chris Voss, a former FBI hostage negotiator, on negotiating, called Never Split the Difference. It's not necessarily a sales book, but it's probably the best sales book I've ever read. And he talks about, when you have more information, more intel, then you can build a case. It talks a lot about, the emotional aspects, but there is no doubt that the information you go into a negotiating conversation with definitely affects the frame of reference of both parties and the overall outcome of the situation, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And we've actually, in the last week, we've had 2 cases, and we, as a part of this process, also ask for our economic buyer in that partnership to building the business case to participate in these procurement conversations. So it's generally myself, rep, procurement, and our economic buyer on these calls. And twice in the last week, when we've gone through this exact process of laying out the data points, the value proposition, and they've gotten pushback from the procurement person on terms. In both cases, the economic buyer has actually stepped up and said, we've actually already agreed to these terms, and I've already gotten authorization from my boss on these terms. And it's just like, okay, well then I guess that's the end of that conversation for the moment.
Right. Oh man, I love it. Well, Matt, this has been a great conversation. I love to hear the changes that you guys made, and really, the results that have come out of it. It seems like they've been a significant multiplier for you guys, and excited to stay in touch and see how this continues to help you guys. I think there are a lot of folks listening to this, whether they're in sales or in marketing, but selling to the enterprise, and could implement something similar or take some tactics from what you guys have been doing. So if anybody listening to this, Matt, would like to reach out to you, ask any follow-up questions, or just stay connected with you and the folks at Bombora, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Sure. My email is mgingrich@bombora.com. Twitter handle MMGING. And you can also find me under Matthew Gingerich on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to chat with anyone.
I love it. Matt, thank you so much for breaking down this process change you guys have made. I think it's going to be really valuable for a lot of listeners. Really appreciate you coming on the show today, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. We're really excited about it.
Digital marketing agencies have a tough job. You have to stay on top of the latest marketing strategies for your clients and your agency. What if there was a way you could address both at the same time? Imagine your agency putting out content with greater quality and quantity. Envision bringing your clients a turnkey solution for one of B2B marketing's fastest growing media strategies, podcasting. All those clients asking for your help with their account-based marketing efforts? Picture being the first to bring them the idea of content-based networking, showing them the proven strategy for breaking into their most coveted accounts. Here's the concept. Sweetfish Media is looking to work with a limited number of innovative agencies interested in a new partnership model. We produce a podcast for your agency. You introduce the power of podcasting and Sweetfish services to your clients. Everybody wins. Learn more at sweetfishpartners.com.